The thing about galactic empires is that they always think they're so damn clever with their entertainment. Take the Hegemony Empire, for instance. These cosmic bureaucrats had turned political imprisonment into a spectator sport, complete with overpriced snacks and commentary that would make a sports announcer weep with envy. The Grand Colosseum of Nexus Prime stood like a metallic tumor on the planet's surface, its gleaming spires reaching toward stars that had probably seen better civilizations rise and fall. Lieutenant Zane had been dragged through those towering gates 3 months ago, still wearing the tattered remains of his military uniform and what remained of his dignity. The border skirmish that landed him here had been a masterclass in bad timing. Wrong place, wrong moment, wrong species to mess with when you're outnumbered 50-1. But hey, that's what happened when you were a human military strategist who thought he could outmaneuver an alien empire that had been conquering worlds since before Earth figured out fire. The arena's waiting chambers reeked of fear, disinfectant, and something that might have been alien sweat. Though, with some of these species, it was hard to tell where natural musk ended and biological warfare began. Zane sat on a metal bench that had clearly been designed by someone who'd never encountered a human spine. Watching his 3 assigned teammates prepare for another day of what the Empire cheerfully called competitive survival entertainment. They called themselves the Cubs, though Zane suspected that nickname had more to do with their ages than any resemblance to Earth's furry creatures. The Empire had a twisted sense of humor when it came to team assignments. Throw together the most unlikely combinations and see what happened. It was like cosmic reality television, except the ratings were measured in body counts. Flux bounced on his oversized paws, his cat-like ears twitching with nervous energy. The Falarian stood barely up to Zane's chest, but what he lacked in height, he made up for in pure, concentrated attitude. His orange and black striped fur practically bristled with excitement, and his golden eyes held the kind of mischief that usually preceded either brilliant victories or spectacular disasters. Sometimes both. "You ready for today, Zane?" Flux asked, his voice carrying that peculiar purring undertone that all Falarians possessed. "Because I've been studying the combat recordings, and I think I figured out how to make that Gorvanian champion cry for his mommy." "Pretty sure Gorvanians don't have mothers," Zane replied, though he appreciated the enthusiasm. "They reproduce by arguing with rocks until something hatches." Granite looked up from where he'd been meditating, or possibly just staring at the wall. It was hard to tell with his species. The gemstone alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, his crystalline body reflecting the harsh arena, lighting in rainbow patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't attached to someone who could probably bench press a small spacecraft. His voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke, each word carefully chosen and delivered with the precision of someone still learning the language. "Gorvanians do have mothers," he said thoughtfully. "Very large mothers. Very angry mothers. Met one once. Not pleasant experience." Mist drifted closer, her ethereal form barely disturbing the air around her. The Voidlands native looked like someone had taken a human silhouette and filled it with starlight and shadow. She didn't speak often. Her species communicated primarily through emotional projection, but when she did, her voice sounded like whispers carried on a cosmic wind. "The champion fears us," she said softly, her pale eyes reflecting depths that seemed to go on forever. "I can taste his anxiety from 3 levels up. It tastes like burnt metal and regret." Zane had stopped questioning how mist could taste emotions. In a universe where some species breathed methane and others photosynthesized their lunch, emotional cuisine was relatively mundane. The problem was, Zane wasn't sure he'd be around long enough to see how their next match played out. The headaches had started 2 weeks ago, sharp, stabbing pains that felt like someone was rewiring his brain with a plasma torch. Then came the dizzy spells, the nausea, and the unsettling discovery that his hands shook when he thought nobody was looking. The arena's medical scanners had delivered their verdict with all the warmth of a tax audit: genetic incompatibility syndrome, accelerated by prolonged exposure to the alien atmospheric cocktail that kept Nexus Prime habitable for its diverse population. In layman's terms, the air was slowly killing him, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do about it. Well, almost anyone. Attention! Meat packages! The voice of Arena Master Drex crackled through the intercom system with all the charm of fingernails on a chalkboard. Today's entertainment schedule has been updated. Team designations and match rotations are now posted on your cell displays. Try not to die before the paying customers get their money's worth. Drex was the kind of bureaucrat who'd probably been born wearing a clipboard and a sneer. The Nexari official stood barely 5 feet tall, but his species made up for their lack of height with an abundance of tentacles, attitude, and an apparently genetic predisposition toward making everyone else's life miserable. His office overlooked the arena floor like a vulture's perch, and Zane had caught him more than once watching the matches with the expression of someone calculating profit margins. The Cubs gathered around Zane as he checked their match schedule on the grimy display screen. 3 preliminary team battles, followed by individual combat assessments. Standard arena fare, designed to test everything from tactical coordination to individual survival instincts. "You look pale," Flux observed, his whiskers twitching with concern. "Well, paler than usual. Which is saying something because humans already look like they've been living in caves for generations." "Thanks for the pep talk," Zane muttered, though he couldn't argue with the assessment. The mirror in their shared cell had been showing him a stranger's face for the past week. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under his eyes, and skin that had taken on an unsettling grayish tint. Granite placed one massive crystalline hand on Zane's shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle despite the alien's size. "You are sick," he stated with characteristic directness. "Arena medicine no good for humans. Need proper treatment." "Arena rules are clear," Zane replied, reciting the regulations he'd memorized during his first week. "No outside medical intervention for prisoners. Death is the only acceptable excuse for forfeiture of combat duties." Mist's emotional projection washed over them like a cold wave. Frustration, anger, and something deeper. Something that felt like the fierce protectiveness of a pack animal defending its young. "Rules," she whispered, and somehow she made the word sound like a curse. Always rules, never exceptions for decency. The truth was, Zane had maybe days left before his condition deteriorated beyond the point of no return. The Cubs knew it, he knew it, and probably half the arena staff knew it. But the Empire's entertainment machine ground on regardless, because political prisoners weren't people. They were content, and content had to perform until it couldn't anymore. The first match of the day went well enough. They faced off against a team of Saurian mercenaries who fought with all the strategic brilliance of angry lizards. Flux's speed, Granite's raw power, and Mist's ability to project terror into their opponents' minds made for a combination that the crowd loved and their enemies feared. Zane coordinated their movements from the sidelines, calling out tactical adjustments and trying to ignore the way the arena lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with his headaches. But by the second match, his vision was starting to blur around the edges. The third match passed in a haze of shouted commands and desperate improvisation. By the time they returned to the waiting area, Zane could barely stand without swaying. "That's it," Flux declared, his tail lashing with agitation. "We're going to the medical bay." "Can't," Zane managed, slumping against the wall. "Arena regulations." "Forget the regulations." Flux's voice rose to something approaching a yowl. "You're dying, and they expect us to just watch it happen?" Granite's crystalline features shifted into something that might have been determination. "Rules exist to be broken," he said slowly. "Sometimes breaking rules is right thing to do." Mist drifted closer, her form seeming to solidify with resolve. "The medical bay has human-compatible equipment," she said. "Restricted access, but not impossible access." "You're talking about breaking into a secured Imperial facility," Zane pointed out, though his heart was racing, "and not just from the illness. That's not just rule-breaking, that's treason. They'll execute all of us." Flux grinned, showing teeth that were definitely designed for more than just eating vegetables. "Only if they catch us." The plan they hatched over the next hour was either brilliantly simple or simply insane. Zane wasn't sure which, and he was starting to suspect the distinction didn't matter. The arena's medical facility was located 3 levels down from the main combat floor, behind enough security measures to protect a small moon. But security systems, no matter how sophisticated, were designed by beings who thought in predictable patterns. Granite's species had evolved on worlds where crystal formations were as common as trees, and his natural resonance abilities could interfere with electronic systems in ways that most security designers never anticipated. Mist could project emotions strong enough to cloud judgment and create confusion among guards. And Flux? Flux was small, fast, and had the kind of natural stealth that came from being a predator species, even if he preferred cracking jokes to cracking skulls. As for Zane, his job was simple: try not to die before they could save him. The maintenance window came at the shift change, when the arena's skeleton crew was focused on preparing for the evening's main events. Granite placed his hands against the facility's outer wall and began to hum, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the metal structure itself. Security screens flickered, alarms hesitated, and electronic locks forgot what they were supposed to be locking. Mist drifted through the corridors ahead of them, her emotional projections creating pockets of confusion and distraction among the guards. Anyone who might have noticed 4 figures moving through restricted areas suddenly found themselves thinking about anything except their jobs. Flux led the way with the confidence of someone who'd clearly done this sort of thing before, his padded paws silent against the metal flooring. They made it to the medical bay's outer chambers without triggering a single alarm, though Zane suspected that was about to change. The human-compatible healing pod sat behind a barrier of reinforced transparent aluminum, surrounded by warning signs in a dozen languages. All of them essentially said the same thing: property of the Imperial Medical Authority. Unauthorized use punishable by immediate execution. "Well," Flux said cheerfully, "good thing we're not planning to get caught." The thing about desperate plans is that they always sound brilliant until you're actually executing them, at which point they reveal themselves to be the kind of ideas that evolution should have weeded out millennia ago. But here they were, standing in front of enough restricted medical equipment to outfit a small hospital, while Zane's condition continued its enthusiastic march toward the finish line. The healing pod gleamed under the sterile lighting, like some kind of technological sarcophagus, all smooth curves and blinking displays that probably cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. It was designed for humans, one of the few pieces of equipment in the entire facility that wouldn't try to cure Zane by replacing his organs with something more suitable for a methane-breathing insectoid. Readings indicate the pod is fully functional, Mist whispered, her ethereal form flickering as she interfaced with the nearby computer systems. Her species had evolved in the spaces between dimensions, which apparently gave them a natural talent for slipping through electronic security, like it was made of suggestions rather than code. But activation requires Imperial authorization codes. Flux examined the access panel with the focused intensity of someone who'd clearly spent time on the wrong side of security systems. Authorization codes are just numbers, he said, his claws extending to manipulate the interface with surgical precision. And numbers want to be free. That's not how authorization codes work, Zane pointed out, though he had to admire the Falarian's optimism. You'd be surprised, Flux replied, his whiskers twitching with concentration. Most security programmers are lazy. They use patterns, birthdays, sequential numbers. The Empire's codes are probably something stupidly obvious, like the founding date of the hegemony, or the Supreme Chancellor's favorite number. Granite stood guard by the entrance, his crystalline form refracting the corridor, lighting into prismatic warnings of approaching footsteps. Guards change patrol route in 10 minutes, he rumbled quietly. Must work fast. The irony wasn't lost on Zane that he was probably about to die, while his alien teammates committed high treason to save him. 3 months ago, these same species had been shooting at human forces across a dozen border worlds. Now they were risking execution to steal medical equipment for someone they barely knew. Got it! Flux's triumphant yowl was quickly muffled by Mist's emotional projection of urgent quiet. The access code was EMPIRE-1. Seriously, these people deserve to be robbed. The healing pod's lid slid open with a soft hiss, revealing an interior that looked like the inside of a very expensive coffin. Sensors and medical apparatus lined the walls, ready to scan, diagnose, and hopefully repair whatever was wrong with the occupant. Assuming, of course, that the occupant wasn't supposed to be there. This is insane, Zane muttered, but he was already moving toward the pod. The alternative was waiting around to see which would kill him first, his condition or Arena Master Drex's creative interpretation of prisoner management. Insane is relative, Flux observed. Compared to some of the things I did back on Falaria Prime, this is practically conservative. Zane settled into the pod's interior, trying not to think about the fact that he was essentially climbing into a piece of stolen Imperial property worth more than his hometown. The medical sensors activated immediately, bathing him in scanning beams that felt like warm sunlight mixed with electric curiosity. The diagnostic display lit up with readings that would have been fascinating if they weren't describing his imminent demise. Genetic incompatibility syndrome, advanced stage. Cellular breakdown accelerating. Estimated time to critical failure, 68 hours. Well, that's cheerful, he said, watching the numbers scroll past with the detached fascination of someone reading his own obituary. Mist drifted closer to the pod's control interface, her form solidifying as she concentrated on the complex medical systems. Treatment protocol available, she announced, but it requires 36 hours of continuous therapy. 36 hours? Flux's ears flattened against his skull. We'll be lucky if we can keep this secret for 36 minutes. Granite's warning rumble echoed from the doorway. Patrol approaching. 2 guards, standard route. We'll pass in 90 seconds. They had maybe a minute to make the healing pod look like it had never been disturbed, get back to their cell, and pretend they'd been there the entire time. It was the kind of timeline that made light-speed travel look leisurely. Flux's claws flew over the control interface, downloading diagnostic data and treatment protocols onto a portable storage device that definitely hadn't been issued by the Empire. If we can't run the full treatment now, at least we can figure out what you need. The pod's lid slid closed, sealing away their best hope of keeping Zane alive. Mist's emotional projections swept through the facility like invisible fog, encouraging anyone nearby to think about anything except the medical bay. Granite's crystal resonance scrambled security recordings, turning their infiltration into digital static. They made it back to their cell with approximately 15 seconds to spare, which in heist terms was practically a leisurely stroll. Zane collapsed onto his bunk, exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. The brief medical scan had confirmed what he already knew, but seeing it displayed in clinical detail made it feel more real somehow. "So," he said, staring at the ceiling that had become as familiar as his own reflection, "what did we learn from our little field trip?" Flux consulted the stolen data with the focused intensity of someone cramming for a final exam. Good news and bad news. The good news is that the healing pod can definitely treat your condition. The bad news is that it requires a full treatment cycle, which means 36 hours of uninterrupted therapy. And the worst news, Mist added softly, is that the treatment must begin within the next 48 hours, or cellular damage becomes irreversible. Granite settled his massive frame against the cell wall, his crystalline features reflecting their dim lighting in fractured patterns. "Tomorrow is solo combat day," he said with characteristic directness. "Zane fights alone against Gorvanian champion. Arena rules forbid team interference." The pieces of their impossible situation clicked together like a puzzle designed by someone with a particularly cruel sense of humor. Tomorrow's match was supposed to be Zane's individual combat assessment, a solo fight against one of the arena's most dangerous opponents. No backup, no support, just him against something that could probably arm wrestle a small moon. Under normal circumstances, it would have been challenging but manageable. Zane had survived 3 months in the arena by being smarter and faster than opponents who were stronger and meaner. But in his current condition, fighting a Gorvanian champion would be less like combat and more like assisted suicide. "We could forfeit the match," Flux suggested, though his tone indicated he knew it wasn't really an option. "Claim illness. Demand medical evaluation." "Arena regulations are clear," Zane replied. "Forfeiture without approved medical cause results in immediate termination of combat privileges," which was the Empire's polite way of saying they'd shoot him and find a more entertaining prisoner. Mist's emotional projection carried undertones of fierce determination mixed with something that felt like pack loyalty. "Then we break more rules," she said simply. "We interfere in the match, get you to the medical bay, and deal with the consequences later." "The consequences will be execution," Zane pointed out. "For all of us. The Empire doesn't forgive that level of rule-breaking." "Maybe," Granite rumbled thoughtfully. "But dead is dead. You die tomorrow in arena, or you die in 2 days from sickness. We die for breaking rules, or we watch friend die for following them." There was a certain crystalline logic to his reasoning that was hard to argue with. They were all prisoners of an empire that viewed them as entertainment rather than people. The rules weren't designed to protect them. They were designed to extract maximum dramatic value from their suffering. Flux began pacing the confines of their cell, his tail lashing with agitation. "The arena's security systems are designed to prevent escapes, not medical emergencies. If we can create enough chaos during the match, we might be able to get you to the healing pod before anyone realizes what's happening." "And then what?" Zane asked. "Even if the treatment works, we'll still be fugitives in the middle of an Imperial facility. They'll hunt us down the moment the pod opens." "Cross that bridge when we get to it," Flux replied with the breezy confidence of someone who'd clearly survived several impossible situations through sheer audacity. "Right now, The priority is keeping you alive long enough to worry about the consequences. Mist drifted closer, her form seeming to solidify with resolve. Arena Master Drex monitors all matches from his observation deck. If we can neutralize his ability to coordinate security response, we gain precious minutes. How do we neutralize someone 3 levels up and behind reinforced barriers? Zane asked. Granite's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. Resonance frequencies affect all electronic systems, he said slowly, including communication arrays, security networks, and structural support systems. You're talking about bringing down part of the arena, Zane realized. Small part, Granite clarified. Very small part, probably. The plan that emerged over the next few hours was the kind of desperate gamble that would have made professional criminals weep with either admiration or horror. It involved precise timing, multiple simultaneous rule violations, and a level of trust that probably violated several laws of physics. Phase 1. During tomorrow's match, Granite would use his resonance abilities to disrupt the arena's communication systems, preventing Drex from coordinating an immediate response to their rule-breaking. Phase 2. Flux and Mist would interfere in the combat, turning Zane's solo match into an unauthorized team battle. Phase 3. Under cover of the chaos, they'd fight their way to the medical facility and get Zane into the healing pod. Phase 4 was still under discussion, mainly because it involved either escaping from an Imperial maximum security facility or convincing their captors not to execute them for treason. Both options seemed equally unlikely. You know, this is probably going to get us all killed, Zane said, as they finalized the details. Probably, Flux agreed cheerfully, but at least it'll be interesting. Mist's emotional projection carried notes of grim satisfaction. Better to die fighting than to die following rules that were never meant to protect us. Granite nodded slowly, his massive form seeming to fill their small cell with determined presence. Cubs protect pack, he said simply, is natural law, stronger than Empire law. As they settled down to wait for tomorrow's match, Zane found himself wondering when 3 alien prisoners had become more loyal to him than his own species' military command. The Empire had thrown them together as an entertainment experiment, but somewhere along the way, they'd become something the bureaucrats hadn't planned for. They'd become family. And family, as the Empire was about to learn, didn't follow rules when those rules meant watching each other die. The morning of what would later be called the Great Arena Catastrophe dawned with all the ominous charm of a cosmic audit. Zane woke up feeling like he'd been used as a punching bag by a particularly vindictive gravity field, which was actually an improvement over the previous day's sensation of being slowly dissolved from the inside out. The arena's morning routine proceeded with its usual bureaucratic precision. Bland nutritional paste that tasted like regret, mandatory hygiene protocols, and equipment checks that seemed designed more for humiliation than actual safety. Arena Master Drex's voice crackled through the intercom system with his customary enthusiasm for other people's suffering. Today's entertainment features individual combat assessments, he announced, with the warm charm of a tax collector. Prisoners will demonstrate their personal combat capabilities against selected opponents. Medical staff will be standing by to collect remains. Flux stretched with feline grace, his movements carrying none of their usual playful energy. Nothing like a cheerful send-off, he muttered, checking the small devices they'd cobbled together from stolen components and pure desperation. Granite sat in meditation, his crystalline form resonating with barely audible harmonics that made the cell walls vibrate in sympathy. He'd been practicing his frequency manipulation all night, fine-tuning his ability to disrupt the arena's electronic systems without bringing the entire structure down on their heads? Probably. Mist hovered near the cell's entrance, her ethereal form flickering with nervous energy. Her emotional projections had been carefully contained since dawn. The last thing they needed was to broadcast their intentions to every empathic species in the facility. "Guard rotation changes in 20 minutes, she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of barely controlled tension. "Arena Master Drex will be in his observation deck. Security teams are at minimum staffing for the morning shift." "Perfect," Zane said, though the word felt like ash in his mouth. His condition had deteriorated overnight to the point where standing required conscious effort, and his hands shook no matter how hard he tried to control them. Fighting a Gorvanian champion in his current state would be less like combat and more like performance art. Specifically, the kind where the artist becomes one with the canvas in a very permanent way. The pre-match preparation area buzzed with its usual mixture of fear, bravado, and the particular brand of gallows humor that developed in places where death was a spectator sport. Other prisoners went through their warm-up routines with the focused intensity of people trying not to think too hard about their life choices. Zane's opponent waited in the adjacent preparation chamber, and even through the reinforced barriers, his presence was unmistakable. Gorvanian champions were bred for combat, the way other species were bred for intelligence or artistic ability. This particular specimen stood nearly 9 feet tall, with natural armor plating that could probably deflect small-caliber weapons and muscles that looked like they'd been sculpted by someone with a very aggressive interpretation of anatomy. "Remember," Flux said, quietly, his voice barely audible over the arena's background noise, "you just need to survive long enough for us to break every rule in the Imperial Handbook." "No pressure," Zane replied, trying to inject some humor into what felt suspiciously like his final conversation. The arena floor stretched out like a metallic desert, its surface scarred by countless battles and stained with substances that were probably better left unidentified. The crowd filled the surrounding tiers with the enthusiastic bloodlust of beings who'd paid good money to watch other people die for their entertainment. Their roars echoed through the massive space like the sound of a particularly violent ocean. Arena Master Drex's voice boomed from the public address system, his words carefully calculated to extract maximum dramatic tension from the proceedings. "Today's featured combat pit's human military strategist against Gorvanian champion Thok, the Bone Crusher. Victory conditions, survival, or death. Medical intervention, prohibited. Entertainment value, guaranteed." Thok the Bone Crusher entered the arena with all the subtle grace of a natural disaster. His footsteps shook the floor, his breathing sounded like industrial machinery, and his eyes held the kind of focused malevolence that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. The crowd's enthusiasm reached fever pitch as he raised his arms and roared a challenge that probably violated several noise ordinances. Zane walked onto the arena floor with as much dignity as he could manage, which wasn't much considering that his legs felt like they were made of unreliable gelatin. The distance between the entrance and the combat area seemed to stretch on forever, each step requiring more effort than the last. The opening bell rang with the finality of a funeral gong. Thok charged across the arena floor with surprising speed for something his size, closing the distance between them in seconds that felt like hours. Zane managed to sidestep the initial attack through pure muscle memory, his training overriding his body's enthusiastic attempts to shut down. The Gorvanian's first swing would have taken his head clean off if he'd been standing where physics suggested he should be. Instead, it whistled through empty air while Zane rolled away, trying to put some distance between himself and several hundred pounds of very motivated alien muscle. "Come on, little human," Thok rumbled in accented common, his voice carrying the kind of cheerful menace that suggested he was genuinely enjoying himself. Make this interesting. The crowd paid for entertainment, not target practice. Zane circled warily, looking for openings that probably didn't exist, while trying to ignore the way his vision kept blurring around the edges. Gorvanian anatomy was built for durability rather than speed, but when your opponent could probably bench press a shuttlecraft, speed became a relative concept. The second attack came faster than the first, a sweeping blow that caught Zane across the ribs and sent him sprawling across the arena floor. Pain exploded through his chest, mixing with the existing symphony of discomfort that his condition had been providing all morning. That's when the Cubs decided that arena rules were more like guidelines anyway. Flux dropped from the spectator galleries like a furry missile, his claws extended, and his usual playful demeanor replaced by something altogether more predatory. He hit the arena floor in a perfect combat roll and launched himself at Thok's back before the Gorvanian realized he was no longer fighting a solo match. "Surprise!" Flux yowled, his claws finding gaps in Thok's natural armor with surgical precision. "Hope you don't mind if we make this a team sport." The crowd's roar shifted from bloodthirsty enthusiasm to confused excitement. This wasn't supposed to happen. Arena rules were sacred. Violations were punishable by immediate execution, and team interference in solo combat was the kind of transgression that made bureaucrats wake up in cold sweats. Arena Master Drex's voice crackled over the communication system, his usual composure replaced by apoplectic fury. "Security teams to the arena floor immediately. Unauthorized combatants detected. This is a violation of Imperial regulations." That's when Granite decided to demonstrate why his species had evolved on worlds where the geology was more suggestion than fact. The massive crystalline alien placed his hands against the arena's structural supports and began to sing, not with his voice, but with his entire molecular structure. The sound was barely audible to most species, but it resonated through the facility's metal framework like a tuning fork struck by a cosmic hammer. Electronic systems throughout the arena began to malfunction in spectacular fashion. Communication arrays dissolved into static. Security cameras displayed abstract art instead of surveillance footage, and the automated defense systems started arguing with each other in binary. Arena Master Drex found himself trapped in his observation deck as the blast doors sealed shut, their electronic locks convinced that they were protecting him from a radiation leak that existed only in their confused circuits. Mist materialized in the arena, like a ghost with a very specific agenda, her emotional projections washing over the security teams in waves of confusion and uncertainty. Guards who'd been rushing toward the combat area suddenly found themselves wondering why they were running, what they were supposed to be doing, and whether they'd remembered to feed their pets that morning. What followed was less like a fight and more like a carefully choreographed disaster. Thok, finding himself facing 3 opponents instead of 1 dying human, adapted with the kind of professional flexibility that explained why Gorvanian champions commanded premium rates. He grabbed Flux by the tail and used him as an improvised weapon against Granite, who caught the Falarian with surprising gentleness before setting him down and returning his attention to the business of structural sabotage. "This is highly irregular," Thok complained, ducking under one of Mist's psychic attacks while trying to grab Zane, who was using the chaos to stay mobile despite his body's protests. "I was promised a solo combat assessment, not whatever this is." "File a complaint with management," Flux suggested, bouncing off a wall to avoid another sweeping attack. "I'm sure they'll get right on that." The arena floor began to crack under the stress of Granite's resonance manipulation, geometric patterns spreading outward from where he stood like a crystalline spider web. Chunks of metal and composite materials rained down from the ceiling as support structures decided they'd had enough of being structural. The crowd was going absolutely wild. They'd paid for entertainment, and entertainment was exactly what they were getting, just not the kind that appeared in any official Imperial handbook. Spectators from a dozen species were on their feet, cheering, placing bets, and recording everything for posterity. Security teams, report status! Arena Master Drex's voice cut through the chaos, though his communication system was now translating his words into what sounded like ancient Vulcarian poetry. Status is complicated, came the reply from a guard who was currently staring at a wall and trying to remember his own name, courtesy of Mist's emotional interference. Zane found himself backed against the arena's medical station, his strength nearly exhausted, but his mind still working with the clarity that came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The healing pod was 3 levels down, through corridors that were probably swarming with confused security personnel and automated systems having nervous breakdowns. "This way!" he shouted to his teammates, indicating the maintenance access that led toward the medical facility. "We've got maybe minutes before they figure out what's happening." Flux disengaged from his running battle with Thok by the simple expedient of launching himself off the Gorvanian's head and landing next to Zane with feline grace. "Minutes? I'm impressed. I figured we had seconds." Granite's resonance reached a crescendo that made the entire arena structure groan in harmony. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid decided it needed a vacation, bathing everything in hellish red illumination that made the chaos look even more dramatic. Mist swept toward them like a tide of controlled fury, her emotional projections now focused on a single, overwhelming message: protective rage. Anyone who tried to interfere with their escape would find themselves face to face with the psychic equivalent of an angry mother defending her cubs. They fought their way through corridors filled with confused guards, malfunctioning security systems, and the general pandemonium that resulted when a facility designed for perfect control encountered opponents who refused to follow the rules. Granite's resonance cleared their path by convincing electronic locks that they were actually decorative suggestions, while Mist's projections encouraged anyone they met to suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. The medical facility's doors stood before them like the gates to salvation, assuming salvation came with a 36-hour treatment cycle and a very high probability of execution afterward. "Almost there," Flux panted, his usual boundless energy finally showing signs of strain. "Just need to get past the final security checkpoint, activate the healing pod, and figure out how to not get killed for the next day and a half." "Simple," Zane managed, though his vision was starting to narrow to a tunnel and his legs felt like they were made of rapidly dissolving sugar. That's when Arena Master Drex's voice echoed through the facility's emergency communication system, his words carrying the cold finality of imperial justice. "All units, converge on Medical Facility Level 3. Prisoners are to be terminated on site. Repeat, lethal force authorized. The Empire does not negotiate with rule breakers." The cubs looked at each other with the kind of grim determination that had probably gotten their respective species through countless evolutionary challenges. "Well," Flux said cheerfully, "at least now we know where we stand." The healing pod's activation sequence began with a soft chime that sounded suspiciously like a funeral dirge. The thing about going viral in a galactic empire is that it happens faster than light-speed communication and with about as much subtlety as a supernova in a quiet neighborhood. While Zane was unconscious in the healing pod and the cubs were barricaded in the medical facility expecting execution at any moment, Something extraordinary was happening across the Empire's entertainment networks. Every single moment of their arena rebellion had been broadcast live. The Empire's entertainment division, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that unprecedented rule-breaking would make for premium viewing content. They'd kept the cameras rolling through the entire spectacular violation of arena protocol, streaming it to billions of viewers across hundreds of worlds. What they hadn't anticipated was how those viewers would react to watching three young aliens risk everything to save their dying human teammate. The footage was everywhere. Flux launching himself into certain death to protect Zane. Granite literally tearing apart the arena's infrastructure. Mist facing down armed guards with nothing but psychic fury and loyalty. Within hours, it had spread beyond the official entertainment channels into underground networks, social media platforms, and even governmental communication systems. "Sir," Arena Master Drex's assistant stammered, bursting into his office where the Nexari official was, furiously trying to coordinate damage control. "We have a problem. Actually, we have several thousand problems, possibly millions." The main display screen showed protest crowds gathering on Imperial worlds from the core systems to the Outer Rim. Signs in dozens of languages all carried the same message: free the Cubs. Honor their loyalty. Rules without heart are not rules worth following. But the real problem wasn't the protests, it was who was joining them. "Military personnel are refusing orders to suppress demonstrations," the assistant continued, his voice cracking with stress. "Imperial citizens are demanding clemency for the prisoners. And, sir, we've received a priority communication from the diplomatic corps." Drex's tentacles writhed with agitation. What does diplomatic want with arena prisoners? The answer came in the form of a holographic transmission that materialized above his desk with the kind of official importance that made bureaucrats break out in cold sweats. The image resolved into a distinguished human in diplomatic robes, flanked by Imperial officials who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "Arena Master Drex," the diplomat said, with the kind of polite steel that preceded political catastrophes. "I am Ambassador Fletcher. I believe you have my son." The silence in Drex's office was so complete it had its own gravitational field. "Your son?" Drex managed, his voice climbing several octaves. "Lieutenant Zane Fletcher, captured during border negotiations 3 months ago. The same Lieutenant Fletcher who has apparently inspired unprecedented loyalty among his alien teammates." The ambassador's smile could have cut diamond. "The same teammates who are currently facing execution for the crime of trying to save his life." The political implications hit Drex like a cargo hauler traveling at maximum velocity. Zane wasn't just any random prisoner. He was the son of the human diplomat who'd been secretly negotiating peace treaties with the Empire. Executing the Cubs wouldn't just create martyrs, it would destroy months of delicate peace negotiations and probably start another war. "But sir," Drex protested weakly, "they violated arena regulations. They broke Imperial law. The precedent—" "The precedent," interrupted an Imperial official whose rank insignia suggested he could probably have Drex reassigned to a waste processing facility with a single memo, "is that the Empire recognizes exceptional loyalty and courage, regardless of species. These prisoners have demonstrated qualities that our own citizens find inspiring." The crowds outside the arena had swelled to the point where local security couldn't contain them. Chants of "Cubs! Cubs! Cubs!" echoed through the streets, while vendors sold hastily produced merchandise featuring the unlikely team. Someone had already composed a ballad about their rebellion that was climbing the entertainment charts faster than Imperial censors could suppress it. 3 days later, Zane woke up in the healing pod to find the cubs sitting around him like furry, crystalline, and ethereal guardian angels. His first coherent thought was that he felt better than he had in months. His second was that they were all probably about to be executed for treason. "Good news and better news," Flux announced cheerfully. "The good news is that you're completely healed. The better news is that we're not dead yet." "Yet," being the operative word, Zane said, sitting up carefully. "Actually," Mist said softly, her form practically glowing with satisfaction, "we're free. All of us. Turns out, the Empire doesn't execute teams that become galactic heroes overnight. The terms of their release were typically imperial in their bureaucratic complexity. They would continue as a team, but in exhibition matches across the Empire, serving as goodwill ambassadors for interspecies cooperation. It was either the most elaborate punishment in galactic history or the most unusual diplomatic appointment. "There's one more thing," Granite rumbled, his crystalline features shifting into what might have been amusement. Zane knew about diplomatic immunity all along. Could have claimed it any time. Zane grinned at his teammates, his family. "Yeah, but then I would have missed out on learning what real loyalty looks like." As they walked out of the arena together, past cheering crowds and frustrated bureaucrats, Flux's tail lashed with satisfaction. "So, what's our next adventure?" "Whatever it is," Zane replied, "we face it together. That's what cubs do." Behind them, Arena Master Drex watched through his office window, muttering about the good old days when prisoners followed rules, and entertainment was predictable. Sometimes, as the Empire had learned, the best rules were the ones worth breaking for the right reasons.